Hi humans, it's Hannah. Welcome back to the second channel. This is the sister channel to Hannah the Horrible, and welcome back to me reading your personal scary stories. I'm very excited for today's video. Now, we usually do 5 stories, but we actually have 4 stories today. One of those stories in here is very, very long, and so I made room to accommodate that story because it was a story I really wanted to tell. Here she comes. Okay, so as you guys know, we're starting to get a little bit more financial support over on this channel because between the time and the editing, I am making $0 off this channel, which is fine. I love it. It's really fun. However, if we want to sustain this channel long term, then I am going to need a little bit of extra help. So today's video has a sponsor. We're going to roll to that. Please watch the sponsor to support the channel if you have time, and I'll be right back with you. So you guys want to know something that makes me super duper mad about the TikTok ban? Or as somebody in my comments said the other week, what really steams my clams? So I'm going to say that. You want to know what steams my clams about the TikTok ban? They're all preaching about the security of our data when they don't mention the fact that literally any of us could go online, go to a data broker's website, pick anyone's data and buy it for a few dollars. It is completely legal to do this, and they conveniently leave this out of the TikTok argument. That's right. Big companies with poor securities get hacked every day, and your personal information is being sold on the dark web to spammers, scammers, and identity thieves that can target you, and they face 0 repercussions from doing so. So with that being said, pop quiz. If the government can ban TikTok for security reasons, why aren't they as concerned about stuff like this? This is why millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha seem to a lot of people that we just don't care about our data being sold and everything. And it's not that we don't care. It's just that we know that it's an excuse to ban TikTok when our data is already all over, and our government won't protect us from within from the American companies that are already doing this to us. So why would we want TikTok to be banned? TikTok brings us joy. Anyway, it's pretty much every person for themselves nowadays, at least in my country, which is why I use today's sponsor, which is Aura. Aura keeps me safe online by doing all the grunt work for me. They will identify data brokers who are selling my information, and they will submit opt-out requests on my behalf. Give Aura just a few weeks and you can actually go back and Google yourself again, and you will see that your data has disappeared from a lot of the places that it was on before. Not only is this comforting, but it will also just lead to less spam and less headache. Us in the horror niche and the internet mysteries niche, we know how much of a threat the dark web can be, but Aura continues to monitor your information on the dark web and will let you know if any of it has been exposed. They'll let me know if this information is being used to try to access my credit or debit cards. Plus, they give me up to $5 million in identity theft insurance in case the worst does happen. You can go to my link, which is aura.com/thehorrible, to try 14 days for free. That will be plenty of time for Aura to find out if any of your personal information has been exposed. Thank you again to Aura for sponsoring today's video and also just having our backs. The link will always be right below this video, easy to find, clickable in the description. When you got a haircut and she has a bully stick and she doesn't know what to do with it because she doesn't want to chew on it because she's not a normal dog. All right, let's get right into it with story 1 for today. This one goes, "Hi, Hannah. I know you already hear this a lot, but I wanted to start this off by saying that I'm quite the fan of your content. I've been watching your stuff for about a year now, and I love your commentary and personality." Thank you. "I like to watch a lot of horror-centric YouTubers in my spare time, usually in the background when I'm drawing, and you're among one of my favorites that I tend to be a returning viewer of. About myself, I am a male, so you can refer to me as such. If you need a name for me, just to make it easier, you can call me D. That's not my real name, but just to refer to me if you need/want to. Thank you." Thank you, D. That is helpful. "These stories involve paranormal experiences. I don't think any trigger warnings of really heavy topics apply, so all are free to listen/read without much risk. At worst, you'll pee your pants. Joking." Nonetheless, they are spooky in my opinion. If you have any notes or possible explanation for these, Hannah, I would love to hear them because they're just as puzzling as they are scary. Okay, I'm excited. This first story comes from the perspective of my mom, as I didn't experience it firsthand, but I was involved, I'll bet very young at the time. I don't remember much of it myself. She swears up and down that this truly happened the way it did, and she usually isn't a fanatic believer of ghosts, so take that as you will. It happened many years ago, yet she still recalls it vividly, and it still freaks her out to this day. This took place a long time ago, many years ago when I was a very small child. Me, my mom, and younger baby sibling were together in a small apartment that we lived in. Me and my little sibling were playing together with toys in our bedroom, as little kids usually like to do. Mom was just outside of our bedroom, cleaning the floors in the hallway and kitchen, which were closely nearby one another. Again, small apartment. Been there, lived in a 450-foot studio for like 7 years. I totally understand. Everything's just in one room. She couldn't keep a close eye on us 24/7 as she was sweeping the floors, but we were generally in her field of sight as the door was kept open and there was a baby gate in place so that neither me or my sibling could wander out. As Mom was cleaning, she recounts that in the corner of her eye, she spotted the figure of a child running into the kitchen. She had assumed that it was me. She turned the corner into the kitchen, calling my name, irritatedly ordering me to get back into the room while she cleaned. However, when she turned the corner, she had immediately realized that there was actually no one there. No one, in fact, left the room that me and my sibling were in. She looked back at the room and we were just playing as normal. To this day, this remains unexplained. My mom, my sibling, and I were the only ones in the apartment at the time. Oh my gosh. That unlocked a memory for me, though, of your mom telling you to get away while you were cleaning. I remember my mom mopping the floors when I was a kid and feeling like you were not allowed to go anywhere near those floors. Like she made it seem like it would ruin everything. It's like dads with the lights. Like if you turn on the lights in the car, if he's driving at night, you know how all dads freak out about that? That's what my mom used to do. What made it seem like something bad was going to happen if you touched the floor while it was wet. That's so creepy, though, that she saw a little boy in the corner of her eye and assumed that it was you, huh? It would be really interesting if she had had like obviously I wouldn't wish this upon her, but like what if she had had a miscarriage or something that she never told you about? And it was like, because I have heard of that happening, of people having either a twin in the womb that doesn't make it, or, you know, a child that was never unfortunately born or stillborn. And then, you know what I mean? That would be really interesting too. But I hope that's not the case because I don't want your mom to have gone through that, of course. But my other thought was, have you ever looked into the apartment building as well? Do you remember the address? You could go on to and try to research some of the background of the house to see if anything weird happened there, if anyone passed away there, any children especially. So, okay, this next story comes from my own perspective. This does not take place in the same apartment all those years ago. My family moved homes more than the average family, but it took place a decade later from the previous story, and I can recall it better. At this point, I'm living with 3 of my cousins, my mom, the same younger sibling I mentioned earlier, and an even younger sibling. Full house, I know. It was for a brief moment, but it stuck with me ever since it happened. I was just getting up to go to my room after a conversation with my cousins, and as I was walking towards the hallway, everyone else still being in the living room, I heard a voice, whispery, right up to my ear. It very clearly said my name. I turned around and see no one. Confused, I walked back to the living room to ask if anyone called my name. All of the answers I got were, of course, no. At this point, I wanted to think that they were messing with me, but I was in the hallway when this happened, reasonably far enough away from the living room, to which I doubt one would be able to teleport behind me and then back. I could have imagined it, but I'm not the type to spontaneously hallucinate like that. I'm not a schizophrenic or diagnosed with the type of thing to give you those type of hallucinations either. Oh, that's so weird. I do kind of feel like maybe there's some scientific explanations for auditory hallucinations. I don't know if that's the case in this case, especially if it only happened once. I would be more suspect of some sort of undiagnosed psychological phenomenon happening if this was happening frequently or if this happened more than once in different places, But if it only ever happened once and that's it, that is very, very odd. And then you have one more story. I have another story that I wanted to mention, which I believe to be the last one that was interesting enough for me to recount. This was fairly recent compared to the other two, taking place around 2022 or early 2023. Poor memory regarding dates. Apologies for the estimation. This takes place in the same house as the previous story. I was home alone for a little bit as the rest of my family went to run some errands. I opted not to go by my own volition. I'm usually not scared to be home by myself. We have pets as well, but they were playing in the backyard at the time. I got up from my room and decided to cook some food for myself, as one does when they're hungry. The meal I was cooking normally took me about 15 or 20 minutes to prepare, so I was standing focused in the kitchen for some time. As I was finishing up, I suddenly started hearing a voice of an unrecognizable male. It was noises that resembled a voice to me, but any words were unintelligible, and I heard footsteps emanating from the hallway. The footsteps sounded like someone wearing those heavy dress shoes. They were unmistakable. It immediately caught my attention, and my head turned as my eyes darted towards the hallway. Nobody was there. I walked into the hallway myself to see if I could investigate, but again, nothing I could see was the source of the noise. For a second, it made me believe my family came back home early, but I didn't recognize the voice or shoes. I investigated any sort of entry point in the house to see if they had been forced open in case of an intruder, but nothing was touched after my family had left. I was seriously ready to fight someone for a second until I realized literally nothing or nobody was in the house except for me. I was dumbfounded. I got my food and headed back into my bedroom in the usual hell nah state of mind one would have after such an experience. Whatever it was, I didn't feel like dealing with it. I just wanted my food. My family returned about an hour later and I told them about what happened, my mom not being surprised. Could it be possible that these experiences just follow us no matter what house we're in? Thank you, Hannah. If you ended up reading this, I'm nothing short of elated to hear you read this on your channel. I hope I was able to give someone the chills in the best way possible. And best regards, that was from Dee. Thank you so much, Dee. That is interesting. From what I know of paranormal lore, there can be a ghost that haunts a house or an entity that haunts a house or a specific place, or there could be an entity that haunts you. Not necessarily possessing you, but it's attached to you and it follows you from one place to another. Now, that being said, I would personally expect it to be a little more frequent than this, since you've only had a couple experiences over many years. I would expect if something was attached to you for you to have a bad feeling all the time or feel like it was affecting your life quite frequently. Not to say that it's not possible, but that is really interesting. I would be curious to know if there's any scientific possibilities for it, because 2 out of 3 of these were auditory hallucinations, whether it was a ghost or not. I'm not saying that you were hallucinating, because I know that you feel like it could have been real. Let's pretend ghosts are absolutely not real. Both of these technically fit the definition of auditory hallucinations. So that is kind of what I'm wondering is, again, I'm not saying schizophrenia or anything that's even a big deal or that would affect your life at all, but I do kind of wonder if there's anything out there that can make you sometimes hear auditory hallucinations. I'd be curious to know, were you really, really stressed during these times? If you were really lacking sleep and you were stressed, like maybe you were in school of some sort and you were stressed about finals or something, if you have all those things combined, it can definitely cause you to start to hallucinate either auditorily or visually. So I would just be curious to know of other circumstances that you were experiencing around that time as well. regardless, it doesn't make these less scary, no matter whether there's a logical explanation or not. So I do appreciate you sharing the stories. They are very, very creepy. I would pee my pants if this happened, if either of those happened to me. Okay, moving on to story number 2 for today. Hey, Hannah, just want to say I love your channel. You do such a great job. I wanted to share a weird thing that happened to me and my family a while ago. You can call me Morgan, and my YouTube channel is called Captain Garbage. I review horror novels. Oh, that's awesome. Everybody go check out Captain Garbage. I'll have Taylor put a little icon of their channel so you can go check it out if you'd like. I'd love that. I'm actually going to go check that out because I have been really into reading horror novels. I don't read a ton, but I try to read just a little bit every day. And as you guys can imagine, I exclusively read horror for the most part. So yeah, I'll have to go check it out. Okay. I want to start off by saying that I don't really believe in the paranormal, but this is something I just can't explain. This happened many years ago when my daughter was just 4 or 5 years old. After we dropped off my daughter at daycare one day, my husband proceeded to tell me about an awful dream that he had the night before. He woke up not being able to move, and he just saw a black mass swirling above our bed. He tried to scream, but he couldn't. It sounded like sleep paralysis, but he doesn't have a history of that. Sorry, I should probably read ahead before I do that. However, that does sound like classic sleep paralysis. That sounds like literally every symptom of sleep paralysis. Being awake but not being able to move, the black mass swirling above your bed is a very common visual hallucination of sleep paralysis, and trying to scream but you can't make a sound. That's all the telltale signs of sleep paralysis. That's so funny that this comes up because I was just listening to Monsters Among Us. I shout them out all the time because that's like my favorite paranormal podcast. They just made an episode about sleep paralysis stories exclusively. And so I just did an hour-long listen of sleep paralysis stories, and almost everybody said very similar things to that. So I'm going to read on though, and I'll give my conclusions at the end. Okay. Fast forward to a few weeks later, and I find one of my daughter's drawings in her room. I ask her about it. Oh no, I don't like where this is going. I'm scared that this is going where I think it is. And she explains that it's a picture of mommy and daddy's room. I can see what looks like a bed, and there's a big black scribble above it. I ask her what it's supposed to be, and she says very casually, "Oh, that's the black thing that lives over your bed." I swear we had never mentioned that dream in front of her. I don't understand how she knew about it. She never gave me any further information about it. I was just going to suggest, like, are you sure that dad didn't tell her that she had that dream? I'm not a parent, but I am familiar with children. I worked in childcare for a long time. I have worked and babysat with kids and worked with very small children for a long time, including 4 and 5-year-olds. You would not, no parent would tell their kid a story like that. So I fully 1000% believe you that neither you nor her dad told her about his dream, because that would be a punishment for yourself, if anything, because you'd be giving them nightmares. So that's terrifying. Oh my gosh. I take back everything I said, because like I said, that does sound a lot like sleep paralysis, but I don't know how your daughter did. Okay, here. Listen to Monsters Among Us. Like I said, I shout them out a lot, but you should call in that story, because that would make a great story for his podcast as well. I'm so glad that we could share it here, but his podcast is probably bigger than this channel. In fact, I know it is. His podcast is more equivalent to my main YouTube channel, to the Hannah the Horrible YouTube channel. We get roughly the same amount of views per year on his podcast versus my YouTube channel. So to get more ears on this would be a really interesting story. So I'm going to have their podcast link down below. It's Monsters Among Us. The host is Derek Hayes, and you should submit that story to him as well, because that is terrifying. And I would be really interested to know what he has to say, because unlike me, I'm just one person. He has a researcher, and he has a lot of other help with his channel, and more people that can go research that kind of thing and maybe come up with other solutions / other explanations, or he might have another paranormal take from it. That would be my suggestion for that. So, okay. This person has one more short story. Here's an optional story you can share on a more lighthearted note. This is something that my daughter shared with me when she was about 5 or 6 years old. Daughter said, "Mommy, did you know that I used to be a 32-year-old man?" Me, oh. Daughter, yep, I used to be a 32-year-old man, but then I died and became a little girl. Me, getting a little freaked out. How did you die? Daughter, I drowned in a pool full of chicken wings. Me, you're grounded. And daughter, cackling, says, I died the way I lived. Or why did you ground her for telling you something scary? That feels unfair. Yeah, she's a character, though to this day, she maintains that she used to be a 32-year-old man who drowned. I still don't know if she's serious. Thanks if you happen to read this. You are amazing. Is that daughter the same daughter that drew the picture? Because maybe your kid has a sixth sense or something like that. So, okay, we're going to move on to story number 3 here. I just want to remind everybody to please like the video. Please subscribe to this channel if you're enjoying these stories. A lot of times people are getting recommended videos over and over in the YouTube recommended page, but aren't actually subscribed to the channel and they don't realize it. But if we get this channel growing more, that means more stories are submitted, and that means juicier, crazier stories for me to read on the channel. So please do make sure to engage with the video a little bit, like and subscribe to the channel. Of course, only if you are enjoying and you want to see more of these videos. Okay, now we're gonna start story number 3, and I believe this is a non-paranormal story. If I remember, I skimmed just a tiny bit of it before I knew it'd be a good story. And this is a very, very long story. So everybody get comfy. I hope you have a snack or a little drinky drink, because here we go. Hey, so really quick thing. My makeup is just a mess in this video. I think it's because I get emotional during this video and I did not wear waterproof mascara for some reason. And so it gets all over my face a little bit by the end. So we're just going to ignore that. And yeah, I'm sorry. It's not great to look at. Okay, bye. Okay. Hi, Hannah. I found your channel 3 months ago and binged all your videos. I love the safe, respectful, and wholesome vibes that you bring to the channels, even when discussing the most disturbing of things. I always have your videos on in the background to help me focus while making art, and I've learned some very interesting facts since I started watching you. Thank you. That's so sweet. I'm excited to share this story with you, as it has something I've been holding on to for a long time. It isn't exactly a paranormal story, though it could be interpreted that way, as I'll explain later, but it's definitely one of the strangest experiences from my childhood that I still can't fully make sense of to this day. Okay, so we got like a possible paranormal, but also just creepy story in general crossover. I apologize in advance that this is going to be a long one. I'm very prone to rambling. We love that here, as you guys can tell, but I'll do my best to make it make sense. I've included a TLDR version at the very end of this email. Also, please excuse any instances of wonky English, as it is not my first language, and I'm by no means a storyteller. If you end up reading this in a video, I really appreciate you taking the time. Feel free to call me by my nickname, Ash, and it is she, her pronouns. Wonderful. Thank you, Ash. Okay, so trigger warnings for this story: mentions of vomiting and the suspected grooming and drugging of a child. Okay, FYI, trigger warning for everybody: vomiting and CSA, abuse of a child as well. So anybody, there's always timestamps down below if this is not a good story for you to listen to. Okay, something strange happened to me as a child that I remember to this day, but with gaps in my memory that my mom and sister later helped me fill. I'll start by recounting what I recall from that time, then I'll share the events as they happened from their perspective. Okay, so this is from your perspective. When I was about 8 years old, we had a family friend who, for the purpose of telling the story, I'll name Anne. Anne's husband and my dad were close work buddies, so she and her husband often came to visit. I don't remember much about her husband, as I only interacted with him on occasion, but I remember Anne very vividly. She had a gentle smile, and I distinctly recall the deep crow's feet around her eyes because she was always smiling. She had long, beautiful auburn hair that she let me touch and play with. She always played with me and spoiled me rotten with toys and dolls, which I kept for a while as a child until they all disappeared one day. Anne began visiting more frequently on her own as she and my mom grew closer. She always came bearing gifts for me and played with me as usual. One day, while both my dad and Anne's husband were away on a business trip, Anne invited my mom over and insisted that I come along, as she was going to bake me a chocolate cake, my favorite. Okay, so the dads went away on a business trip. Your mom's really close friend Anne, and your friend Anne, kind of your aunt Anne, are all hanging out, and they're going to bake a chocolate cake. Okay. This was the first time we would be visiting Anne at her place, so I was very excited. I wore my favorite denim dress and cherry red Mary Janes. Taylor, can you put a picture of Mary Jane's right here in case a lot of people don't know what those are? I know what those are, but even those are before my time. So people know what those are. Anne always complimented my outfits, calling me her fashion princess, so I felt that I had to look my best to live up to my proud new title. When we arrived at Anne's house, she welcomed us warmly and gushed over my outfit as usual. She then led me to a beautifully decorated room with a child-sized bed as well as a small desk and a library. The room was clean, tidy, and filled with toys, like everything a kid could ever dream of. All sorts of dolls and teddy bears occupied the bed, and several dollhouses lined one of the walls. A huge train set took up the middle of the room, and toys of all shapes and sizes were scattered about. Anne told me I could pick anything I wanted to play with and left me there to join my mom in the living room. Okay, so I'm sure you'll answer this in the story, but my first red flag here is, why does Anne have an entire playroom dedicated to kids if you've never mentioned Anne having kids? And I imagine if Anne did have a kid, she'd be playing with you, or you at least would have mentioned her. My antennae are going up a tiny bit at that. You'll probably answer my question though. As Anne and my mom chatted, I started to play but felt quite shy about it. Even though Anne had said that I could play with whatever I liked, it was clearly someone else's room and those were their toys. I kept thinking I should wait for my playmate to arrive. I wasn't especially eager to meet this other kid, especially since I felt a twinge of jealousy over their beautiful room and all these toys. Time passed and still no one joined me. I must have asked Anne at some point whose room it was, or if the other child would be coming soon, because I distinctly remember my mom scolding me for asking such a rude question. Anne, however, didn't seem to mind and reassured my mom that it was perfectly fine. Okay, so you asked and Anne didn't answer. Interesting, but was nice about it. Soon I started to get bored, so I left the playroom and went to sit with my mom. Anne got up and gently guided me back to the room, even though I tried to tell her I didn't feel like playing anymore. This happened repeatedly. Every time I grew tired of being alone and went to join my mom, Anne would lead me back to the playroom, showing me a new toy or coloring book and telling me to keep playing. Eventually, I grew so bored and frustrated that I wanted to just go home. I felt quite upset too. I dressed up and had been excited for this visit, expecting Anne to play with me as she always did. But instead, she and my mom sat together chatting, leaving me to entertain myself. I was also promised chocolate cake, but we had been there for quite some time and no cake was in sight. I asked my mom if we could leave and she scolded me for being impatient in front of Anne. But once again, Anne reassured her that it was fine and offered to take me into the kitchen to make me some orange juice. Weird. This is so weird. To be like, no, it's fine. You can ask that question, but not tell you why there's not another kid coming, to promising you chocolate cake and not following through on that, to not playing with you at all and insisting you go back in that room. That is so bizarre. In the kitchen, Anne made small talk and asked me about school as she prepared the juice. She handed me the glass and I returned to the living room, happily sipping on my juice as I sat beside my mom. This is the part that I start to draw a blank and can only recall things in vague fragments. Oh my God. I remember feeling intensely irritated for no particular reason and sobbing, begging my mom to take me home. My mom tried to comfort me, but I couldn't be calmed or reasoned with. Everything became foggy after that. I vaguely remember Anne giving me a toy as we left. I also have hazy recollections of waking up, feeling incredibly drowsy and in pain inside a moving vehicle, and of vomiting in the hospital before feeling better and going home. Anne poisoned you? What the fuck? Oh my God, you told us in the beginning that grooming was involved. She wasn't playing with you, she was grooming you. What the hell? Okay, just gonna keep reading. After that night, I never saw Anne again. We ended up moving, leaving behind both the neighborhood and the strange memory of that evening. It wasn't until many years later that my mom shared the rest of the story with me. Everything I'm about to recount next is exactly what my mom and sister told me happened that day after we left Anne's house. I have chills. My skin has goosebumps. I am about to tear up. I'm so scared. When I grew agitated and couldn't stop crying, my mom excused herself and prepared to leave, but Anne insisted, even begged that we stay, saying the chocolate cake would be ready soon and how much she wanted me to have it because she knew how much I loved chocolate and it would certainly make me feel better. Despite Anne's pleas, my mom politely thanked her and resolved to leave. Anne tried to offer me a toy, but I was having none of it. My mom quickly took me outside, feeling as though she needed to get me away from Anne's house as fast as she could. I was hysterically crying in a way that deeply worried and alarmed her. She knew something was wrong, but couldn't know exactly what. I refused to be touched or held, and whenever she asked if I was in pain, I could only manage to sob, "I don't know." Our house was within walking distance, so my mom hoped the walk in fresh air might calm me. It seemed to work initially, but then something even stranger happened. I suddenly stopped crying and began staring intently at something my mom couldn't see. When she asked if I was okay, I started babbling in childish gibberish and laughing as if I were talking to someone or something invisible. My mom tried to shake me out of it, but it looked like I was in a trance, completely disconnected from reality. I did this for the entire walk home, just laughing and talking to invisible things. At this point, my mom was nearly frantic with worry because I had never acted like this before. When we arrived home, my older sister, who was 22 at the time, immediately noticed something was wrong. I was still babbling nonsense and laughing, unresponsive to either of them. It wasn't long before I stopped, though. I seemed to wear myself out and finally fell asleep. My mom and sister felt a brief wave of relief, but then stayed in the same room that night to keep a close watch over me. Oh my God. Okay, sorry, I had another thought that I don't want to forget because I know there's a lot more to this story. And that is how interesting it is that I just caught my own sexism and my own bias with women. Anne seemed like such a nice friend, but then I was just thinking as I was reading your story, if Anne was a man, if the roles were reversed and it was her husband that had been playing with you all that time and promising you cake and being so nice to you and praising your outfits, and it was Anne who went on the business trip and it was the husband doing all that, we would have looked at this very differently, myself included. It didn't even occur to me that Anne could be grooming you or having nefarious intentions until she actually did something weird and or nefarious. And it is so crazy that if I had just thought if the roles were reversed, would this be creepy? And the answer is yes. And it's true. You have to remember that, like, making friends with a child is weird behavior and it can be appropriate in certain scenarios, but it sounded like she was crossing boundaries by like love bombing you, basically. You know, she was love bombing you with the compliments and the presents and the toys and stuff. And if a man had been doing that, I would have clocked it right away. So I'm just checking my own bias there. So, okay, let's move on with the story. Around 3 a.m., I woke up with a piercing scream. I was crying, shouting, and trying to escape as though I were seeing something so utterly terrifying. My mom and sister later told me that for some odd reason, I kept calling out my sister's name. I had always been a mommy's girl, and my instinct had always been to cry for my mom whenever I needed help. So in retrospect, it was indeed odd that I was calling for my sister. My mom was right there talking to me, but it seemed as if I didn't see her or couldn't even recognize her. They both tried to comfort me, but nothing seemed to work. I was feverish, delirious, still refused to be hugged or held, and complained of a terrible stomach ache. They called 911, and by the time the medics arrived, things had worsened, and I eventually fainted. The medics asked if I might have ingested anything harmful or poisonous, but my mom assured them I hadn't, and they rushed me to the ER. This must have been what I vaguely remembered in that moving vehicle part. For the longest time, I had thought that I had simply fallen asleep in our car when I was actually drifting in and out of consciousness in an ambulance, and each time I awoke, I was crying inconsolably. Almost as soon as we arrived to the ER, I vomited. Almost immediately, I began to feel better. My mom said that she could literally see the exact moment I regained clarity, the moment I came back to her. The doctors gave me electrolytes and ran an X-ray, along with other tests to ensure everything was okay. Thankfully, I was fine. They kept me under observation for a few hours before deciding that I was well enough to go home. Sorry. Okay. So I'm crying too because Sorry, I'm not trying to make this about me. It just reminded me of my mom and how moms are so in tune with their kids, because your mom saying that she saw the moment you came back to her. My mom has said something similar when we've been really, really sick. And when I was having my Crohn's disease thing, and right before I was going to I needed to go to the hospital, my mom would always say that she could tell when we were past the point of being okay, because we would get this glazed over look in our eye where we would look at her and not really be there. And it's like at that moment, she knows that her kid needs the doctor, or in my case, the hospital at that time. And so I'm just getting emotional because your mom did almost the exact same thing. And I just love moms. Moms are so amazing that they're so in tune. I just think they have a bond with their kid that, I mean, they have to, because they birthed them, you know? Moms are just so incredible. Not to say that you have to birth a child to have that instinct. Adopted children, I'm sure, have that same thing. It's just that, like, that maternal motherly instinct is just so deeply ingrained in us. Okay. The doctors explained to my family that it was most likely a case of food poisoning, and when I vomited, I successfully purged whatever had caused the reaction. My mom racked her brain for anything that could have caused this. I had only eaten the same meals which she prepared herself at home and drunk the same water as the rest of the family. Nothing was different in my diet, and my mom had always exercised extreme caution regarding food and drink safety at our home in general. Then it struck her, the orange juice. It was the only thing prepared for me outside our home and by essentially a stranger. My mom wasn't in the kitchen when Anne made it, as Anne only took me in there while my mom waited in the living room. My mom didn't drink any juice herself, having only had tea with Anne. She told her concerns to the doctors about how I had been acting so strangely earlier that day, but the doctors assured her and my sister that they had run all the tests and that everything came back clear. There was no indication of poison or any foreign substance in my system. They reasoned that a mix of the fever and an overactive imagination could have caused me to hallucinate. That is true. A very high fever could cause you to hallucinate. That is technically true, but trying to save my thoughts and not interrupt so much. While I had imaginary friends as a child, both my mom and sister felt strongly that my behavior that day was unlike anything they had ever seen. I had never experienced such a complete disconnection from reality to the point where I wasn't responsive to either of them. The fever explanation didn't make sense to them either, as the hallucination started well before my fever fully set in. By morning, everything was back to normal. I was once again a cheerful, healthy child with no memory of the strange events of the night before, other than visiting Anne, feeling a stomachache, and being taken to the hospital. My mom was never reassured by what the doctor said and firmly believes to this day that Anne put something in that orange juice. She has no proof other than a strong motherly instinct. Whatever happened to me after drinking it simply didn't look like normal food poisoning. She was convinced that whatever was in that orange juice caused me to hallucinate and made me very ill. As she was telling me the story, she revealed all the red flags that eluded me as a child that led her to believe that Anne may have been responsible. When Anne first came to visit with her husband about 6 months before the incident with the orange juice, she seemed so closed off and nervous, preferring to play with me rather than spend time with the other adults. She was fidgety and seemed perpetually stressed, only visibly reacting when I was around. Despite this, my mom still tried to make friends with Anne out of respect to the close friendship between their husbands, and it was hard to get Anne to open up at first, but when she did, it was like a switch flipped. She went from the guarded and nervous woman to a very chatty, clingy friend. Anne used to call my mom every day, unloading her troubles and sharing intimate details about her life. Health issues, intimacy issues, marital struggles, you name it. Needless to say, it was exhausting and quickly crossed from regular conversation into uncomfortable territory. My mom told me that even though she felt trapped by the friendship, she put up with Anne's TMIs and long, one-sided conversations because she felt like she was Anne's only friend in the world. Anne confided in my mom that she and her husband had been trying to have a baby for years without success. My mom deeply empathized with this, which explains her yelling at me for asking my innocent question about Anne's child. Oh, that was clearly a sensitive subject. Anne frequently vented to my mom about how much she wanted to have children. On more than one occasion, she told my mom that she would do anything to be a mother and that my mom couldn't truly appreciate how lucky she was to have children. Anne would sometimes go on rants about how differently she would have raised me if she'd been my mom, something that made my mom very uncomfortable, but she continued to chalk it up to Anne's emotional turmoil and doing her best to support her friend during her difficult time. It wasn't until the night I was rushed to the ER that Anne's words came back to haunt her. Anne's relationship with me in hindsight seems inappropriate, if not a little creepy. She was always asking about me, eager to see me, and constantly commenting on how pretty I was, touching and hugging me more than felt appropriate for someone who was just a family friend. She would often ask for a hug or kiss and wanted me to sit on her lap. All of these gestures seemed innocent at the time. My mom thought that Anne was simply being kind to a little girl who brought her joy. She let Anne get close because she assumed Anne was just experiencing a small taste of motherhood through me. However, after the night in the ER, she began to feel Anne's intentions weren't as harmless as she had once believed. My older sister also admitted that she had never felt comfortable around Anne because she always got the vibe that Anne secretly hated her. Trigger warning for CSA, but that also sounds a little pedophile to me. Creepy in the sense of having a kid sit on your lap is a very common innocent thing that I'm just gonna say pedophiles. This channel's never been flagged for stuff, so I'm sure it's okay if I say it a couple times, that they use to have contact with the kid. So it's weird because it's like I'm trying to figure out what Anne's intentions were. Was it she want to steal you for herself because she wanted a child? Was she a I'm so conditioned to censor it. Was she a pedophile? Was it a combination of both? Very creepy, very, very bizarre. Okay. My mom and sister both believe that Anne was trying to take me away from them to make me into the child she never had. They think Anne may have tried to drug me with the orange juice, which might explain the strange symptoms that began so soon after drinking it, as well as the blackouts and intense stomach pain. My mom later told my dad of her suspicions and decided to end their friendship with Anne. While Anne still visited occasionally with her husband, since he and my dad remained friends, she never came alone again. My mom made sure that I was never present during those visits and discreetly got rid of all the toys Anne had gifted me, which explains how they disappeared. Oh. I'm not entirely sure about the drugging part, but I can't deny that Anne's behavior in hindsight was strange that day, insisting that my mom bring me along because she had baked a chocolate cake and practically begging us to stay, even though she could see that I was clearly in distress. There is also the fact that Anne never invited us over except for that one day when her husband was away and she was alone in the house, which just so happened to be the very day I fell mysteriously ill. We never did have that cake, and I'm honestly glad we didn't stay for it. Sometimes we wonder if there was ever any cake to begin with. Then there's that playroom, which alone stands out as a particularly odd detail in all of this. We shouldn't judge how people choose to cope with their pain, but I can't help but wonder why Anne had an entire room so lavishly decorated with children's toys if she couldn't have kids, and why she insisted that I stay there and play when all I wanted was to sit with my mom. Looking back, it's almost as though she wanted to keep me and my mom apart. Maybe she hoped that I would love the room so much that I wouldn't want to leave. Yep. When I asked my mom if she knew anything about the room, she said that Anne once told her that it was meant for her future child, as she was certain that she was going to have them someday. What happened to me that day was undoubtedly unsettling, and I can understand why my mom and sister suspect Anne. However, I still think that if I had indeed been drugged, something should have appeared in those test results. Yet the doctors assured my family that nothing was wrong with me, and I was, quote, clean. I often wonder if the entire situation was merely a string of coincidences. Memory is a very flimsy and unreliable thing, after all. At the same time, I trust my mom and her instincts. The fact that my sister corroborates the story and shares my mom's suspicions led more weight to the possibility that Anne was plotting something, but to this day, I remain uncertain. I have told this story to very few people throughout my life because I don't have a definitive explanation to what happened. A very close friend of mine, I'll call her Mina, who knows this story and is a believer in the paranormal, theorized that Anne might have been a witch and that she hexed me with the orange juice to make me hate or forget my own mother so she could attempt to take her place. That could explain why I resisted being hugged and comforted by my mom, and why when I woke up screaming that night, I called out for my sister instead, almost as if some force prevented me from seeing my mom was right there and made me forget that she even existed. Mina believes that because it was a hex, there would be no traces left in my body, and its effects would have ceased as soon as I expelled the offending juice. She also suggested that the invisible things I interacted with might well have been demons. I'm on the fence of whether this could be true or not, but I'm open to the possibility. I don't think this was paranormal. I'll tell you why in just a moment. My mom never explicitly said it, but I know she always held herself accountable for what happened to me that night, blaming herself for letting her sympathy for Anne blind her to any warning signs that might have potentially put my life and safety in danger. I have never blamed her for it and remain eternally grateful that she listened to her instincts and severed Anne from my life, whether or not Anne truly harbored malevolent intentions towards me. My dad kept in touch with Anne's husband after we moved out, but chose not to broach the subject of the incident with him. My parents later learned that the couple had gotten divorced, there it is, and that Anne had moved back to live with her family. Wherever Anne is now, I hope that she is at peace and has managed to conceive and find joy in her life. I don't. Sorry, I don't. Doesn't sound like Anne should have kids, or if she does, I hope she got a lot of help beforehand, because regardless, okay, sorry. We're almost done, and then I'll share my thoughts. Thank you so much for taking the time to read my story. I'm sorry that it got so long. Even if my story doesn't make it in a video, it was cathartic just typing it out, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity. If it got featured, I hope both you and the humans enjoyed it and would love to know your thoughts on what you think happened to me that day. Hopefully, I can bring this mystery to a closure once and for all. Thanks, Hannah, for all you do. Give the pets hugs and kisses for me, and wish you a very wonderful rest of the day, week, month/year. Thank you so much. That was from nickname Ash. Okay. Here's my thoughts. I have so many. My very first thought is that Anne clearly had some sort of mental illness. Clearly. I don't buy the paranormal witch hex story at all. Regardless of what was going on, she clearly had mental health issues, and she was trying to find emotional intimacy in your mom because she was obviously lacking it from her husband. Not saying her husband was a bad person. I would imagine that she was a lot. There's probably a reason why they got divorced in the end. But typically, if somebody is latching onto you for emotional intimacy and emotional support and becoming really dependent on you in that manner, it's because they are lacking it in a relationship where that would be appropriate. Not saying that like being extra clingy in a romantic relationship would be appropriate, but codependent people will often, if they lose their codependent source, they become codependent on whoever might come by. I've experienced this self in my own life. I have talked about this with my own therapist in the past. That is why I'm saying this. This isn't coming out of my butt. And so it sounds like Anne was not only had suffering from some sort of mental illness, but also had some real codependency issues, because you don't call somebody that you barely know like that out of the blue and tell them about your sex problems and your marital problems and stuff like that if they're not reciprocating. There's a difference between that and me sitting down with my girlfriends. We're drinking wine and we talk about sex, or we talk about the men in our life and stuff like that. Like, that's just kind of hot goss. If they're having a real issue, it would be more of an appropriate conversation to be like, hey, can I share this really embarrassing thing with you because I would like some feedback, or I would like your advice or your take on it. I want to see if I'm overreact. That's different than just unloading, right? That's different. That's being reciprocated, and that's for a purpose. It sounds like Anne was using your mom as a romantic relationship scapegoat. Like, she wanted somebody in her life. So that being said, the actual incident of the orange juice, I 1000% also believe that whatever happened, the orange juice made you sick. There's no doubt about that. If Anne was just a weird person and had no nefarious intentions, best case scenario, the orange juice had gone bad. Perhaps it had been sitting in the refrigerator for a very, very long time. You probably would have noticed if it tasted bad, though, first of all. And second of all, regular food poisoning or drinking mold probably wouldn't cause hallucinations, although technically it could. However, I do personally think it sounds more likely that she purposely put something in that orange juice. As I hinted when I was reading it, I agree with you that she was trying to set up a room that you would love more than any room in your house, so that when she allegedly planned to kidnap you, you wouldn't be upset. That's why she didn't like your sister, because your sister's old enough and could clock her right away. And that's why she doesn't like your sister, because she might protect you from, her. And she probably wanted to give you that room to be like, look at this room, so that when she did go through with it, or eventually go through with it, you would be happy. Like, you wouldn't worry about your mom because you'd like her room so much better. That sounds crazy. Any child's going to prefer their mom, most likely. Even if they have a terrible mom, most kids still prefer their mom and want their mom, which is heartbreaking to think about. But I can see from Anne's point of view, if Anne is mentally ill and she is not understanding, and all she does is see your mom as the reason she can't have a kid because you're the kid that she thinks she should have, I can see how she would run to that conclusion. So my other thought about this room, though, is why would she poison you right then when your mom was home? That doesn't make a lot of sense. However, I could see, again, if you're mentally ill, I do kind of wonder if the reason she wasn't letting you leave and she kept ushering you back to that room because she wanted you to find something fun in there that you would really love and be taken with. And if she didn't want you guys to leave and kept trying to get you to stay, I kind of wonder if she was trying to bait mom into leaving and leaving you there with her. Again, this is worst case scenario. This is like if she was actually planning on kidnapping you, abducting you, and stealing you for her own. Was she stalling to hopefully be like, your mom has to go somewhere or run an errand or is late for something? And then Anne could conveniently be like, oh, well, I'll watch Ash for you. She could stay here with me. I'll make cake, we'll have orange juice, and we'll play, and yada, yada, yada. And I kind of wonder if that is what happened here. The original plan would be having some reason that your mom would leave her there so Anne could babysit you and then drug you when mom left so that she could abduct you. Total speculation, but the only other thing I can think of is, like, it doesn't make sense why she would poison you while mom was there. The only other thing I can think of is that Anne underestimated how sick it would make you, and maybe in her weird delusional mind, she thought that if you weren't feeling well, then you would just want to stay there and that you would pass out there, and then mom would just be like, oh, you could just have her for a little while. That's kind of all I can think of, but that is the only thing making me doubt the super nefarious intentions, because why would she do it right then and there with mom there? As for the hospital not seeing it on any of the tests, that's kind of like the missing piece that seems to be in your puzzle, but I actually don't think that means much, because people that are going to poison somebody and not kill them, there is so many things out there that won't show up on a regular test, and they're going to test your blood for a lot of things, but there's a lot of things that they're not going to test your blood for. I don't want to Google what poisons won't show up on a routine hospital test because I might get flagged by the FBI and they wouldn't know that it was for research purposes for a video. But I do know that there are some drugs that are not going to show up. Think of Breaking Bad, for example, obviously a fictional show, but ricin. That was a poison that Jesse and Walt were going to use on their victim, and they used it because it was odorless, colorless, and tasteless, and the person just got sick a few days later and would die, and it probably wasn't going to show up on most routine autopsies or tox tests. That's why they used it. Is that real? Completely no. Like, ricin definitely works differently. But all that to say is that I do know that that is why people get away with poisoning so much for a long time, is because just because your blood was tested for the most obvious things like certain bacterias or very common poisons or very common household cleaners doesn't mean that she didn't put something in there that they would not have tested for, unless you were in the hospital for weeks and they were ruling out everything and they couldn't figure out what it is. Then maybe they would test you for more obscure things, or if they were performing an autopsy, maybe they would have tested for those more weird, random, obscure things. But in this particular case, it would not surprise me if they were just like, oh, you're all clear, because they didn't see anything overtly wrong with you and you got better after you threw up. So that is my take on the situation. I personally think, regardless, she had something that she was trying to do. Very, very creepy and very traumatic. I think go with your mom's gut personally, because I think your mom was in that situation and probably remembers it better than you do, especially because you were possibly drugged. Like I said before, mother's instincts are pretty strong and pretty accurate. I want to thank you so much for sharing this story. Even though it was long, it didn't feel long because it was so interesting, kept me at the edge of my seat. And like you said, I hope Anne is enjoying her life, but I kind of also hope that Anne got some help. That's all I'm saying, is that I do think everybody can be redeemed, but I hope that she didn't just go have kids in her state of mind, because she was showing some very creepy behavior. Whether that was pedophile-like behavior, I cannot say for sure, but there's definitely some red flags in here that might suggest that, like the wanting a lot of physical contact with you really creeps me out. Again, if that was some man, a 30 to 50-year-old man doing that, I would find that probably pedophile in nature. So I'm trying to put the same standards on her. If that's not it, though, she definitely was grooming you then for you to like her enough so that hopefully she could like kidnap you. That, or like in true crime stories, we hear of people trying to kill the parents so that they could steal the kids and stuff. Like, so creepy to have a bedroom. I can understand having a closet full of kid stuff for hoping that you'll conceive someday, but most people don't do that if they're not positive they're going to be able to actually have a child yet. That's so weird. I'm so sorry that happened to you, but yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the last story for today. Thank you again so much for sharing that story. That was absolutely bananas. Okay, shorter last story for today. This is story number 4. Hi, Hannah. My name is Grace. I use they, them pronouns, and feel free to share that name only, please. I'm a big fan of your channel and really love your narration as well, so I wanted to share my own story. Thanks for always being super respectful and kind to not only your fans and those who write in, but also everyone you speak on in your main channel videos. I think everyone who covers true, creepy, scary stories ought to have your same level of respect and empathy for those that you talk about. Crossing my fingers, you'll read my story too. You named the story The Peekaboo Man. I love that. That sounds creepy right off the bats. Okay, so this happened when I was 3 or 4, still in pre-K. I remember it very vividly, which is super weird for me because even as a kid, I had really weird specific memory skills that weirded adults out. But anyway, I remembered that I was eating some breakfast before my dad took me to school, porridge specifically, since I was super stubborn and refused to call it oatmeal because Goldilocks eats porridge, not oatmeal, at the kitchen table. From where I sat, I faced the patio/deck and the windows that look onto it. For this reason, my dad would close the blinds when he went outside for a smoke. This was very normal, and I was not at all unsettled by him being out of sight. To my left was an archway that led into our living room. It was right next to me as the crow flies, but a few meters away. Seconds after my dad stepped out, I noticed a man peering into the kitchen from the archway. It may be weird that I remember all this detail, but he was a pretty short guy wearing a blue shirt and black suspenders. He peered at me with a smile on his face, almost like he expected me to smile back. However, being a pretty smart kid, my brain immediately went to, fuck, there's someone in my house that isn't my dad, fuck. So I screamed bloody murder, literally the only time in my life I can recall screaming like this. And my dad immediately came rushing in, probably terrified that I'd burned or stabbed myself. I insisted to him that there was someone in the house, and obviously he grabbed a bat and did a lap through every room. I remember standing with my back to the kitchen corner as he did this because I was genuinely so concerned that there was a man in the house. You know where this is going. He found nothing and took me to school with very little incident. Years later, I still ask him about this, and he just says he assumed my imagination was getting the better of me. A few years later, I must have been 8 or 9, my mom and I are going through some old family photo albums. I run across a picture of a man I haven't seen in a long time. The Peekaboo Man from that day long ago. He's holding a little chubby baby in his arms, me. My mom explained that that was my great-grandfather who died a few months after I was born. He was very close with my sister, and while she didn't tell me this at the time, I later found out that he used to play with my older sister, who, for context, looks exactly like me and would have been 3 or so when he passed, by playing peekaboo from behind her bedroom door. It was their favorite game together. I hope you enjoyed my one and only what I consider to be paranormal story. Thanks for your awesome work and for reading this if you do. You're one of my favorite YouTubers and I love, love, love this series. Sending you so much love. Thank you, Grace. That's so creepy. The fact that you saw it in a photo album later. And it's funny that you say that because we always joke about in the TikTok videos on the main channels about ghosts peeking around the corner. And how they all seem to do that, but it sounds like in your case that was true, and that's actually what they did, which is still, even if it was your great-grandfather who had great intentions and I'm sure was a very nice, jolly old man, that would scare anybody if they saw that when your great-grandfather had already passed away. So, oh my gosh, so creepy. Okay, and kind of a more light-hearted story to finish off such a heavy video. So thank you so much for writing in. Thank you to everyone who wrote in their stories. We have a lot more stories to come. Thank you again to Aura for sponsoring today's video. If you guys want to try your 2-week free trial, all that information will be right below this video. And yeah, don't forget to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already and you want more stories like this in your feed. And I'll see you guys all in the next one. Okay, bye.